Hello, welcome to today's webinar. I really appreciate everyone for coming today, and I especially appreciate those who quickly jumped on board and agreed to participate and share information with everyone today. My name is Anjuli Grantham. I'm Curator of Statewide Services at the Alaska State Museum in Juneau. The Alaska State Museum is working with a host of partners, including the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, on the Preparing Alaska's Cultural Organizations for Emergencies program. And part of this is helping cultural organizations across Alaska to enhance their preparedness and their confidence when it comes to emergency management. Last week, I was lucky enough to attend the State Emergency Management Conference, and there heard a presentation from Celine and spoke with some other emergency managers who voiced concern about this year's breakup. So it seemed, since we are well into spring, it makes sense to connect emergency managers and the National Weather Service with our communities across the state who are on the rivers and could be affected by flooding, so that you can learn about some resources that are available for you. We'll talk about some general preparedness tips, and we'll have times at the end for questions and answers. If questions arise as people are speaking, feel free to use the chat function. And we will also, people can answer on the fly, but then we'll leave time at the end for questions. So we're going to start with Celine Van Breukelen, who is a hydrologist with the National Weather Service. We're then going to hear from Jeremy Zideck and Andrew Sather. They're from the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. They're going to provide some general preparedness tips. And then I'll end and talk about some tips that are specific to collecting and cultural organizations when it comes to flood preparedness. So with that, I will hand it over to Celine. Thank you so much, Celine, for being here today.
Hey, great. Thank you so much for having me. I haven't gotten to meet many of the people on the call. Do you mind just putting the location of where you're from into the chat box? For me, it's helpful to know who I'm talking to so I can address local needs. Okay, so sounds, it looks like we've got road system folks, Anchorage, Talkeetna, Fairbanks, Denali National Park. You know, either like where you're from, or like if there's another, like if you say work for a Native corporation that you have interest somewhere else, just so that way I know that, you know, you're from Anchorage, but you're interested in the Lower Cusco or whatever it is. Okay, got some Fairbanks and Anchorage people. Alrighty, I will go ahead and share my screen. Let's share. All right, do you see my breakup briefing slide?
We do, yes.
Perfect. Okay. Just generally looking at the statewide flood potential, we're expecting the flood potential to be above average for the majority of the state. We had normal ice conditions across Alaska, and like the big thing that we're really tracking is that we have an above average snowpack, you know, across Alaska. And us in the hydrology field are always very interested in, you know, how quickly things are going to be warming up. So a big deal. So one, we're looking at breakup flooding as it's related to ice jams. And so working with our communities in the interior, you know, we're really concerned about having a more dynamic breakup on the Yukon. And that's just because there's a lot of water in the Yukon, and we're concerned about the temperatures warming up pretty quickly. But it seems like we've got more of a road system audience, and the locations mentioned don't really experience a lot of ice jam flooding. So I'm going to go through this part a little bit quickly. But basically with ice jams and with snowmelt related flooding, we care about the pace at which the snow melts. So a thermal breakup is where you have mush out and you basically the ice degrades in place. and the ice becomes very dark and very gray before it moves out. This tends to not lead to as much flooding because that ice is deteriorated. So by the time you get that big snowmelt push, a lot of it's deteriorated and it mushes out. And then the opposite is a mechanical breakup, and that's where we have a really quick warm up, and that's where you have the really strong intact ice that gets pushed really hard, and that creates ice jam flooding. So the flood threat this year, what I alluded to before is that we have a lot of snow. I know that we've got some folks from Fairbanks on the call. The Chena Basin especially has a lot of snow in it, but looking statewide, we've got between 150 to 200% of normal snowpack. And this data was taken from the April 1st snow survey. So at least in South Central, we've melted quite a bit of the lower elevation snow, but we still have quite a bit of snow that is in the more like northerly latitudes, as well as some of the higher elevations. Things that we're looking at, just keeping track of temperatures, for the Fairbanks area, if we had colder than normal temperatures throughout March and early April. And this is typically, when we start to be melting snow and we really weren't. So we're a little bit behind from that perspective, but we've just now kind of turned the corner to have more warmer conditions and starting to melt out that snow in the interior and starting to kick off breakup. And then Bethel in Southwest Alaska, they were cold throughout March and April, and then they've started to become warmer over the past couple weeks. And that's been really great at deteriorating that ice that's on the lower end of the Cusco. Looking at temperatures moving forward, we've got above normal temperatures for the first week of May in Western and Northern Alaska. This is a good thing because many of the rivers, their mouths or their outlets are in Western Alaska. So like the Yukon and the Kuskokwim, that's a good thing because we're starting to really degrade that downstream ice. So that way, when we have that big push of all that snow melt that we're getting, that way that ice will push out pretty quickly. Let me silence my phone here, it's buzzing at me. Okay. Once again, looking towards a more dynamic breakup for these larger rivers. Snow and ice conditions, like the key thing is how quickly the snow melts. Hydrologists love to talk about 2009 and 2013 because those were conditions where you had a lot of snow, and then we had that quick warm up, which is why we had flooding in those 2 years. 2012 had only moderate flooding in 2 locations, and that was because we had like a relatively mild warm up. Village flood potential, we're looking, Circle is one of the ones that we're really concerned with. Also on the Delta, Amonuk and Alukkanuk, and then on the lower Kuskokwim, we've got Aniak, as well as Sleet Mute, Stony River, and Creeflook. Generally looking at breakup as being a little bit later within the interior, between 2 to 5 days late, and Southwest Alaska 1 to 3 days late. I'm going through this a little bit quickly because I know that I've got more of a road system audience, but I'll do a chat and kind of bring it back to the road system in a minute. So there's 2 phases of flooding that we're concerned about, and this is one of the things that we're really harping on with communities. The first flood wave that you get in the spring is related to ice jams, and that's going to be when you have your highest height. That's because you have a very rough channel, and it's because you have a lot of ice in the channel. But then after that initial ice jam push, then you start to have your snow melt peak, and that generally happens a couple weeks later. And that's because that's your like mid-elevation snowpack that you're melting. So especially for like the Matsu, I know that there's someone in Talkeetna. I know that Talkeetna's got erosion issues, and as well as like the Matanuska Valley or the Manaska River in the valley. Those are going to be something we're going to really be looking at, because a lot of those river systems are going to have high discharge, say the last 2 weeks of May into the coming weeks in June. Just really summarizing that the outlook is for above average flood potential, basically throughout the state. Ways to stay aware of what's going on flood-wise. So I'm part of the National Weather Service. These 3 links are to get to your local weather service office. And those are going to give you all of the weather information, all the weather hazards. So if we are issuing, say, like a flood warning or a flood watch, that's going to be the way to get them. Another way is just weather or website wise. There's the website for the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, which is here. It's weather.gov/APRFC. And that has a breakup map, as well as all of the river gauges if you wanted to monitor river conditions throughout the summer. INWS is a really cool weather service program, and that is how you could get weather updates pushed to your phone. That's something that we work with emergency managers to get to them. So if that's something that you're interested in, please send me an email and we can get you set up with that. Basically just summarizing that we have a lot of snow melt here. All right, and that kind of brings me to the end of that. Cancel. Okay, and stop sharing. Okay, so because I've got a lot of road system folks, things that I want you to know is that we do have a lot of snow, and the way that causes flooding in the spring is that's very much affected by how quickly we warm up. So if we just get a really average warm up throughout May and June, we'll probably have streams go towards a bankful condition, but probably nothing that's going to be flooding or outside of bankful. However, if we do get record warm temperatures in May and June, that's when we're going to have the higher river discharges that are more likely to cause issues. The smaller streams, everyone thinks about Willow Creek or the Parks Highway streams, because I know that the Talkeetna snow surveys were record level. Looking at the past couple years of data, it seems like those don't generally tend to be big snowmelt related floods. Those tend to be more precipitation related. But for your more larger rivers, say like the Susitna or the Talkeetna, that's going to be more of a snowmelt driven system. Looking through the list of who's here, Fairbanks, we're working with the Corps of Engineers at the Fairbanks area. Based on the snowpack, it's very likely that the Moose Creek Dam is going to operate to hold back some of the snowmelt. We've had one of the largest snowpacks that we've seen really in the years that we've been monitoring. So I think, and for Anchorage people, we don't tend to have a lot of breakup related flooding, just our river systems just aren't big enough to really cause it. One thing that we could see this summer is enhanced groundwater levels, because we do have quite a bit of snow upstairs, but in the higher elevations in the Front Range. And it's very possible that's going to cause our groundwater table to rise into the spring. That's what I've got. Is that what you were hoping for? Any other questions or something you want me to go into?
I think that's great. And if anyone has questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Also, Selena, I'm wondering if you could put in the chat some of the links that you had on that last slide of yours, so that folks can click on them and then bookmark them.
I can do that.
Great. And then I'll pass it on to Jeremy or Andrew, whichever of you.
I can go first, as this is a group that deals with history. I thought I'd talk a little bit about our RiverWatch program and the history of it. The RiverWatch program is a partnership that we have with the National Weather Service. And every year during breakup, we'll take one of our emergency managers and a hydrologist from the River Forecast Center, and we'll fly along the rivers and actually take a look at that breakup front as it's moving down the river. That way we can provide communities with really up-to-date information so they can make good decisions. This program has really been in effect since the 1960s in some format. They started doing aerial observations of different sections of the river. There's old news stories and old reports of the military crawling out on ice jams and planting explosives in places and trying to blow up the ice jams, and we still get questions about why we don't bomb the river. And what it really does is, as that ice jam releases, it kind of solves the flooding in that area, but creates this large kind of wave of moving pans and chunks of ice that are as big as a house, and those roll down the river and cause problems downstream. So we stopped doing that. In the 1980s, we actually took like crop dusters and were dusting the river in problem areas with coal dust and black sand and trying to weaken these problematic areas and create create kind of channels with this dark material that would create melt through the ice faster. And after doing that for a couple of years, we determined that really wasn't effective. So in around 1989, RiverWatch in its current format started to form and get out and do this active monitoring of the rivers, give people good information so they can make good decisions. And then if we do have problems, we have an emergency manager right there that can land, interact with the community, start talking to the State Emergency Operations Center, and really facilitate that disaster response effort instantaneously. Where in a good case scenario, it would take us 24 hours, 36 hours to dispatch someone to that community from Anchorage because they're so remote. So what we learned is we really can't stop these events from happening. We just got to be aware and get out of the way when they happen. As far as emergency preparedness goes, as a state, we really take an all hazards approach to responding to disasters. We have so many different types of disasters that can impact us here in Alaska. And when it really comes down to it, no matter what the type of event is, people are really going to require the same kind of needs, and we need to provide the same kind of support. And this is food, water, health and medicine, energy, shelter, housing, communication, both information that they need, but also cell phones and radios and radio broadcasts, television, internet, and other forms of communication, transportation, financing, evacuating, support when they're evacuated, care for their pets, special needs considerations. People might have language barriers. And so whenever we're looking at like an individual, a family, an organization, or a community, we really need these same things, just at different levels and in different ways. Specific to river flooding, what we always ask people to do, individuals and families and at the community level, is talk about the risk. So talk to your family members, talk to your friends, your organizations, and really identify how you can respond to an event. For people, we want them to identify family members or elders or neighbors that might need additional support if a flood or some other disaster event occurs. And then kind of talk about how you would deal with that. Second is to make a plan with your family. That's sitting down. We have all kinds of guides on our website, ready.alaska.gov, that can help you develop a family emergency plan. But these are just guides. All you really need to develop a plan is a piece of paper and a pen. And you just sit down and start thinking about what you would do and how you would do it and what everyone's role is going to be. Write down what's important, and also write down phone numbers and other critical contact information. Then we want you to have a go bag, something that contains a little bit of food, a little bit of water, any type of medication, extra pair of eyeglasses, extra pair of clothes, a flashlight, just some very basic things that you might need. Also in that go kit, you can put critical documents. After a disaster, it becomes really essential for people to have things like titles, deeds, birth certificates, marriage certificates, insurance paperwork, those other critical documents that we need. When disasters happen and they impact a lot of people, everyone is going to their insurance company. Everyone is trying to get backup identification. Everyone is trying to get backup birth certificates. And that creates really a log jam at those document providers, and it can really delay someone's recovery. So if you have photographs, photocopies, original documents, whatever it may be, that can really speed up the recovery process. Put that in your go bag or someplace safe that you can grab quickly when you leave your home. Then we want you to kind of look at things. For river flooding, we encourage people to move their boats, their vehicles, other essential vehicles and equipment away from the river, put it on high ground. In rural communities that experience flooding, you want those boats to be accessible, but out of the reach of the flood waters. You want them accessible in case you need to get in your boat and go and rescue somebody or move stuff around while those flood waters are up. Some other things that we can do is just elevate items, put them in waterproof containers. In villages all across the state, we see people do this, put it on countertops, on shelves, even throwing bags of clothing and bags of materials onto their roof. But really, to pack all that stuff up, it takes time. So we don't want to do it as the flood water is touching the threshold of our doors. We want to do that a couple days in advance. Also, be pet prepared. Think about where you're going to transport your pets. In many communities, when we see flooding, people will just set their pets free. They have to evacuate, or they can't access the animals for a number of days, and we'll start to have feral animals, puppy explosions after these events, as animals are free to do what they want. They become a nuisance for people and other pets in that community. It could be a really big problem. And then in some cases, people don't make a plan for their pets, and we see that those pets perish in the flood or whatever other disaster event it may be. And then after you've become personally prepared for these disasters, what we want people to do is talk to their community leadership, find out what their plan. Andrew can talk some about how communities can prepare and some of the tools there, but really talk to them about how they're going to respond. So you have an understanding where the emergency shelters are, if there's anything that you can do to help support that emergency shelter. And then finally, keep up on conditions. We have the RiverWatch teams that are out there. They're broadcasting over VHF radio and calling down to communities. They're landing in communities, meeting people at airports, sometimes going into the communities to talk to people. We have local media. We have response organizations and leadership within the community. All these are really official sources of information. And then, of course, there's the RiverWatch teams and the Alaska River Forecast Center. Celine has put her information in there, and that's just a wealth of information. It goes very deep. Sometimes you have to really look at it because there's so much information there that to boil down and get that information, I'd encourage all of you to take a look at it in advance so you can kind of get an idea of how to navigate through all of that information, and just do some of these steps in advance so you know where to go when you need to go there. When we're panicking and a lot of things are happening, it's very difficult for us to concentrate and find those resources that we need. So identify those in advance. And that's all. I'll turn it over to Andrew now.
Thanks, Jeremy. Not much to add. You hit everything on the head there. As Jeremy explained, the RiverWatch program kind of changed over the course of the years of just some what people thought were best practices back in the day, but then through trial and error, just kind of learning that those actions may not have been most ideal for communities. It shifted to more of an early warning message program to get the word out there to communities. And Jeremy made a lot of great comments regarding having a plan for flood prone areas and having just a personal plan for how to respond to emergencies. And one thing that I'd like to add on to that is it's really great to have all that together, one, just for yourself, but then it also it helps the community as a whole. If everybody takes personal responsibility for their own preparedness, that's that much more, it opens up that many more resources if something like an evacuation shelter has to be opened for an event. The supplies that you bring personally can be used at those evacuation shelters. So yeah, it's really just all about having a plan in place ahead of time, knowing where you're going to go, what you're going to do, how you're going to communicate to your friends and family from the personal level. And then kind of at the community level that we look at for RiverWatch of, again, getting that message out early. We're able to fly the river and see things from a different perspective that folks down on the ground just aren't able to see. And we work in coordination again with like Celine at the National Weather Service and our local partners to kind of find out where are those common areas of concern along the river system. Some of these folks have lived out in these areas for multiple generations, so they know the area inside and out. And we can go and give that aerial reconnaissance to those communities and tell them, hey, this is what conditions are looking like. You might want to start looking at your plans a little bit closer, making sure that everything's up to date. Having some of those predefined like trigger points, like if ice reaches this point and it hasn't started moving, or if we start seeing low level flooding in this region, then we kind of have an idea that something else may be coming on. So just kind of re-emphasizing to the local communities to just keep an eye out in this time of the year for those conditions. And then here at the state, we just partner with, again, the Weather Service and other local and regional corporations to help bolster that local response.
Thank you both, Andrew and Jeremy. So Andrew is an emergency management specialist with BHSEM, and Jeremy is the public information officer. I didn't give their full introduction. So thank you both for sharing. And I'm now going to share my screen and provide some additional tips for those who are stewards of heritage collections, librarians, those who manage collections. So one moment here while I share my screen. Okay, do you see my current slide and my next slide? You just see my current slide? Okay, great. Thank you, Tiffany. So a lot of these are really similar to what Jeremy shared, but they're focused on the institutional level rather than like the family or the personal level. So if you are in a flood hazard zone and in general, of course, these tips are good for all cultural institutions, but especially those who right now are concerned about flooding. Think about communications. Update all of your contact lists. It could be that you haven't updated that list since you've done your most recent wave of hiring. So make sure that you have on there all of everyone's contact information, including staff volunteers, who the emergency responders are in your community, your partners, and make sure that everyone has a copy of this offsite, not just at their desk. Because if it's at your desk and there's a flood and you can't get to work, it doesn't matter. So make sure that everyone has these at their house. If there is some sort of emergency situation or flood situation, who is it that's responsible for initiating contact and continuing that contact when people are off site? And then also consider what your process is in-house for alerting the public if you need to close to the public or if there's some other important announcements that need to be made. Are there multiple levels of permission that you need to do working through your borough? If you're a private nonprofit organization, is it just that the director always does that? You might have something in place, but make sure that you know what that is and you know who's responsible for alerting the public when something important happens. Think about your essential services that you provide to your community and think about your own continuity of operations. So let's say your facility is affected by a flood and it's closed. What services do you need to provide even if you can't really reach your site? A lot of these might just be things like payroll, right? Or a lot will be trying to figure out how to get back in your facility, of course. But think like pared down, what are the services that you must provide in order to maintain operations? And what sort of role might your organization play during the response and the recovery? If you have a location that is at high ground, for example, and you have a backup generator, are you able to open your library, your museum to the community so that people can come and charge their cell phones? What is it that you can provide, especially communication sort of services if communications are challenged in your community? So think about the ways that you can be of service. And then when you think about the collections that you steward, similar to what Jeremy said, raise things off the ground. Everything should be at least 3 to 5 inches off the ground in general, but we know that's not always the case. So especially raise the important items so that they are not on the ground. Make sure that you have backup copies of all of your catalog or your databases and that they're stored out of the hazard zone. So if you have a thumb drive with your collections database on it, that's great, but if it's in your house that's also in the flood zone, that's not super helpful. So make sure that you store these in a place that you know will be safe. Similarly, do the same thing for your essential documents. Just like Jeremy said about like the titles and the deeds and your personal documents, think about what are these essential documents for your organization. Often there'll be things like financial information, core governing documents, payroll. If you happen to be the stewards of municipal records, think about what are those essential records for citizens to be able to retain and prove civil rights, for them to be able to have access to their property records, things like that. So depending on what sort of organization you are, you'll have different essential records, but identify those and make sure you have a plan for those. Also, identify what your priority collections are for evacuation. Of course, we think that everything that we steward is important, but some things are irreplaceable and some things are absolutely essential for us to save. So what are those things? Make a short list of what those things are and come up with a plan for them. Who will bring those things to where? Not anyone should be able to have access to these items and to bring them to any place, right? So make sure that you have a plan in place for who it is that's responsible for bringing them, how they're going to be brought to the place, and where they're going to be stored securely. And if you really are on the verge of thinking there could be a flood coming, make sure that you prepare those for the evacuation. So that means pack them in a box and make sure that the person knows that they have the responsibility to grab that box and to bring it to high ground or wherever it is that you need to bring those materials. Here are some resources that are helpful for you to take a look at. I'm going to so this is being recorded. I'm going to edit the captions, post this to YouTube, and then I'll share this video with you so that you can share it with your colleagues who weren't able to join today, especially those of you who have colleagues that work for libraries or municipalities along the river systems. Please do share this. I'm also at the same time going to share this document, Be Prepared Alaska, which the Heritage Emergency National Task Force created for us. The Tanana Chiefs Conference has a really great flood preparedness website. Please check that out. And as part of the PACO program, we've created an entire course focused on disaster planning. And so there you can see the URL for the course as well as the password so that you can enter that and access all of the resources that we have available. And the course is about comprehensive emergency management, but for cultural organizations. And so it's really geared for the folks like you who are on the line today. Okay, I'm now going to stop sharing. And that's all I had to share. What questions might there be for any speakers?
You know, I have a comment to follow up. I talked about having a go bag, but another essential part of preparedness is having a larger kit that has enough supplies for 2 weeks. We recommend 2 weeks here in Alaska. That's just kind of an insurance policy. If you do have to stay in your home and you run out of supplies, you know, you have to venture out for water, you have to venture out for food and fuel, especially during our colder months. If you don't have some type of indoor safe heat source, you'll have to leave your home and go to a place like a shelter. Unfortunately, we can't support everyone within the community. So we have to set up shelter locations. And the Red Cross American Red Cross of Alaska does an amazing job supporting our shelters, but really no one wants to be in a shelter ever. They'd much rather be at home. And so these emergency kits allow us to stay home. 2 weeks of supplies is a lot of supplies, but just one more little follow-up thing on preparedness.
Thanks, Jeremy. And also thank you for providing that historical background for the RiverWatch program. Seems like it could be a really fun sort of exhibit someday, from blowing up the river to just flying it.
I think somewhere I have some photographs of the crop dusters in action. So, and certainly we have plenty of RiverWatch photographs through and video through the years. So happy to round those up someday, but maybe not this spring. We might have a lot of work to do gathering new information. So,
Indeed. Does anyone else have any comments or any, because I know that on the line there are a lot of experts, there's archaeologists or folks who are stewards of historic properties, other advice or topics that you'd like to bring up? It doesn't have to be a question right now. Sarah, thank you.
Get myself off mute. So thank you guys so very much for putting this together on such short notice. It's a great reminder. You know, we're all excited to have breakup happen, and there's some stuff that tends to happen with it. Just putting in a brief plug. So once the disaster perhaps happens, we're going to be looking towards recovery. And a lot of our rural places, especially along rivers, have historic buildings, etc. And if we have events like what happened in Circle, we might be looking at FEMA assistance or State of Alaska assistance. And so if we're needing to do rehab from a flood on a historic building, keep in mind things like Section 106 in terms of compliance. And so feel free to call our office, and we'll have some folks who will be able to provide assistance on like the best ways to do rehab on those historic structures. Thanks much.
Thanks, Sarah. Sorry, there was just some hullabaloo. I think there might have been avalanche in Juneau. It's like, everyone rushed towards the window of the mountainside. So, Alaska.
Yeah. Andrew, get on it. Get down there, Andrew.
Be on the next plane out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to add 2 links to the chat here. They're links to our daily sit rep that we put out, our situation report from the State Emergency Operations Center. So these are another great resource to kind of stay on up to date with current conditions across the state. So I'll put the link for the website, and also there's an email that you can sign up for to get those emailed directly to you as well.
Thanks, Andrew. There's also, if indeed there is a flooding situation and you are affected, there's a ton of resources that are available on how to salvage collections. Reach out at any time if you want access to those. And soon we're going to actually have a lot of folks in Alaska that are trained in how to do that sort of salvage. We are hosting 3 workshops over the next 5 months in Wasilla, in Juneau, and in Fairbanks, all about salvaging damaged collections. So we will soon have a host of folks in Alaska who are able to do that, which is exciting. They'll let us hope that we don't have to really use it, but it's best to have the training and be prepared. Okay, all, if there's no other questions, we'll end for the day. I'll start with the captioning process, and then I'll send an email out with that resource, Be Prepared Alaska, that was created by HENTA for us, and a link to this program. So please do share this, especially with your colleagues who are on rivers and weren't able to join us today. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and thank you, presenters, so much for pulling this together so quickly.